The day Corinna found out her husband had booked a suite at the Alderton for the weekend. The same suite where they'd spent their first anniversary. She didn't cry. She stood in the kitchen, holding his phone, reading the confirmation email, and the only thing she felt was a strange, hollow quiet. Like the moment before a storm when the birds stop singing and the air goes still. She set the phone back on the counter, face down, exactly where she'd found it. Then she made herself a cup of coffee, sat by the window, and watched the street below as if nothing had happened. That was Corinna Marsh Alderton, 37 years old, wife of Sterling Alderton, daughter-in-law to Prescott Alderton, the man who had 6 years ago shaken her hand at a dinner party and told her, with a smile that didn't reach his eyes, that she was a perfectly pleasant surprise. She'd smiled back. She'd had a lot of practice smiling at things that weren't compliments. Sterling had never told his family what she did for a living. Not really. He'd mentioned vaguely that she worked in medical real estate, which was true, technically, the way saying the ocean is, a body of water is technically true. What he hadn't said, what Corinna had never corrected, was that she was the founding partner and controlling shareholder of Meridian Health Properties, the largest private owner and operator of hospital campuses and specialty care facilities in the southeastern United States. 14 hospital buildings, 31 outpatient centers, more than 4,000 employees whose paychecks traced back through a chain of subsidiaries to her signature. Sterling worked in hospital administration. He was the chief operating officer of Harwick Memorial, a regional medical center in Savannah that had been struggling for years. Aging infrastructure, shrinking margins, a board that met quarterly and argued about parking. 3 years ago, Harwick Memorial had been quietly acquired by a Meridian subsidiary. Sterling knew his hospital had a new parent company. He did not know his wife was the parent company. Corinna had known when she married him. She hadn't hidden it maliciously, not at first. She'd simply been tired of men who wanted her company more than they wanted her, tired of rooms that went quiet when her net worth entered before she did. Sterling had seemed different. He'd been warm, funny, unpretentious in the way that people who've actually worked for things tend to be. He'd fallen in love with the version of her that wore jeans on Sunday mornings and knew the names of every barista at their neighborhood coffee shop. She'd let herself believe that version was enough. For 3 years it had been, then Prescott got sick. The elder Alderton's illness wasn't terminal, as it turned out, but it was serious enough to upend the family's sense of itself. Prescott had built a small empire in Savannah real estate, not the kind of wealth that makes national headlines, but the kind that funds private school tuitions and vacation homes on St. Simon's Island and the assumption, in a certain social circle, that your family name carries weight. His illness reminded everyone that the weight wasn't permanent. His wife, Margot Alderton, 63 years old, and possessed of a talent for gracious cruelty that Corinna had always quietly admired, responded to the vulnerability by doubling down on control. She reorganized the household, the family calendar, the holidays, and, with increasing frequency, her opinions about Sterling's marriage. "Corinna is lovely," Margot said once, in the kitchen, loud enough for Corinna to hear from the hallway. "But she's not what I imagined for Sterling. She's very private." The woman she was saying it to was Brienne Holt, 31 years old, daughter of one of Prescott's oldest business associates, recently divorced, recently relocated back to Savannah. Margot had started inviting Brienne to family dinners around the time Prescott's diagnosis came in. She'd started seating her next to Sterling around the time Prescott came home from his second hospital stay. Corinna noticed. She noticed the way Sterling laughed differently around Brienne, looser, younger, unburdened. She noticed that he started going to the gym at 6 in the morning again, which he hadn't done since the year before their wedding. She noticed that when he texted her from work, the messages got shorter. Not cold exactly, just thinner. She told herself she was imagining it. She told herself that for 7 months, the weekend of the Alderton suite at the Alderton Hotel, Sterling told her he had a conference, healthcare operations, 2 days, mandatory attendance. He'd even mentioned the name of the conference, some industry acronym she didn't bother to look up. He'd kissed her on the cheek on Friday morning, grabbed his overnight bag, and walked out the door with the particular ease of a man who has rehearsed a lie until it feels like memory. Corinna waited until his car had turned off their street. Then she called her assistant, a meticulous woman named Deb who had worked for Meridian since before Corinna had named it, and asked her to pull up the Alderton's client account. Meridian owned the Alderton Hotel building, not the hotel brand. The building itself, the entire property, acquired as part of a mixed-use development deal 4 years ago. The hotel leased from them. "I need the registration log for Suite 14-8 this weekend," Corinna said. "Don't contact the hotel directly. Pull it from the property management system." Deb was quiet for a moment. You're sure? I'm sure. The log came through in 20 minutes. Sterling Alderton, 1 room, 2 guests, check-in Friday, check-out Sunday. The second guest's name wasn't listed, but the credit card on file was Sterling's personal Amex. Corinna sat with that for a long time. Then she called her attorney. Her attorney was a woman named Gloria Osei, sharp and unhurried, who had been handling Meridian's corporate work for 9 years and Corinna's personal affairs for 6. When Corinna explained what she wanted, Gloria asked one question. Do you want to know everything before you move, or do you want to move now? Everything first, Corinna said. It took 2 weeks. Gloria worked quietly, the way Corinna had always preferred. No drama, no leaks, just information assembled carefully like a case being built. By the end of the second week, Corinna knew that Sterling and Brienne had been seeing each other for approximately 5 months. She knew which restaurant they favored, which Saturday afternoons they'd overlapped in schedules, which florist Sterling had used to send something that was not sent to his wife. She also knew, because Gloria was thorough, that Sterling had recently been approached by Harwick Memorial's board about a potential contract renegotiation. His current contract as CO was up for renewal in 60 days. The board, her board, though they didn't know it, was evaluating whether to renew, restructure, or replace the position. Corinna read the summary Gloria sent her. She read it twice. She set it on her desk and looked out the window of her home office, the one that looked out over the garden she'd planted the second spring of their marriage, the one Sterling had helped her dig beds for on a warm Saturday in March, both of them muddy and laughing by the end of it. She thought about that Saturday for a while. Then she went back to work. The family gathering was Prescott's 68th birthday. A dinner at the Alderton house, the old one on Abercorn Street with the wraparound porch and the live oaks in the front yard, the kind of house that announces itself before you've stepped inside. Margot had arranged everything, which meant the table settings were flawless and the warmth in the room was architectural, designed, positioned, load-bearing in a specific way. Corinna arrived with a bottle of wine Prescott actually liked and a card she'd spent 20 minutes choosing. Sterling arrived 10 minutes later, having told her he'd be coming straight from a meeting. He was wearing the blue shirt she'd bought him for Christmas 2 years ago. He looked well. He looked like a man who had recently been happy in a way that had nothing to do with her. Brienne was there. Of course she was. She came with her father, which gave it cover, which was the kind of detail Margot was good at. She sat across from Sterling at the dinner table. Corinna sat beside him and watched him make a point of not looking at Brienne too often, which meant he looked at her exactly the right amount. The careful, practiced amount that only makes sense if there's something to be careful about. Prescott gave a short speech about gratitude and family. He looked at Corinna when he said family, and she wondered if he meant it, or if that too was architectural. After dinner, when the group had migrated to the back porch and the conversation had broken into smaller streams, Margot came to stand beside Corinna at the railing. The garden was dark and fragrant. Somewhere nearby, cicadas. You seem tired, Margot said, not unkindly. Long week, Corinna said. Margot was quiet for a moment. Sterling works so hard, she said. He needs someone who can really be present for him, someone who understands what he's building. Corinna looked at her. What is he building? That smile, the one that arrived fully formed, like it had been ironed. His future. A family. Real roots, Corinna. Sterling is a roots kind of man. He is, Corinna agreed. She finished her wine. She thanked Prescott for the evening. She said goodnight to everyone, hugged Sterling in the way she'd been hugging him for months. Warmly, carefully, the hug of a woman who has not yet decided what comes next, and drove home alone. She sat in the driveway for a few minutes before going in. Then she called Gloria and told her to prepare the papers. Sterling didn't see it coming. That was the part, afterward, that Corinna kept turning over. Not with satisfaction exactly, but with something quieter, like the feeling of a math problem resolved correctly after a long effort. He had not seen it coming. Gloria served the divorce papers on a Tuesday. Corinna wasn't home. She was in Atlanta for a Meridian board meeting, which was where she'd been planning to be all along, because she had learned long ago that the cleanest way to do a hard thing is to already be somewhere else when the hard thing lands. Sterling called 4 times that afternoon. She let them go to voicemail. The messages went from confused to urgent to something close to desperate in a progression that took about 2 hours. By the 5th message, he'd shifted to a different register, quieter, more careful. I think we need to talk. I know what this looks like. But there are things you don't understand, Corinna. About the situation. About what I've been dealing with. She listened to all 5 messages on the drive back to her hotel. She didn't call back. He came to the house on Thursday. She was there that time, because she decided she would be. She opened the door and let him in, and they sat in the living room. The room where they'd argued and laughed and fallen asleep on opposite ends of the couch through 6 years of a marriage, and she listened to everything he said. He said he was sorry. He said it had been a mistake. He said Brienne didn't mean what Corinna might think it meant. He said he hadn't been feeling seen, which was a sentence that arrived with its own specific gravity, and Corinna let it sit in the room between them without touching it. Then he said, "The timing of this, I need you to understand. My contract at Harik is up in less than 2 months. If this gets out, if it looks like my personal life is unstable." "Your contract," she said. "I'm not saying that's the most important thing, but you're saying it." He looked at her. She looked back at him. She thought about the garden and the anniversary suite and 5 months of careful, practiced glances across a dinner table and a woman she'd watched him make a point of not looking at. "I'll sign whatever you want me to sign," she said. "That part can be simple." She didn't tell him what she knew. She didn't mention Meridian, or the property records, or the fact that the board evaluating his contract renewal was, through a chain of corporate structure she had personally engineered, accountable to her. She didn't tell him any of it. She simply let him leave. He signed 2 weeks later. Corinna's terms were clear, fair, and comprehensive in the way that legal documents prepared by excellent attorneys tend to be. She kept the house. She kept the investments in her name. The joint accounts were divided cleanly. Sterling didn't contest anything, which told her that whatever guilt he carried, he was carrying it in a way that made him need the whole thing to be over. The day after the papers were finalized, Corinna called Gloria. "The Harik board meeting," she said. "I want to be present for the CO evaluation. I'll attend as a Meridian representative." Gloria was quiet for a moment. "In person? You've never done that before." "I know. Sterling will be there." "I know that too." The Harik Memorial Boardroom was on the 4th floor of the hospital's administrative wing, a room that smelled like carpet cleaner and recycled air, with a long table and 8 chairs and a window that looked out over the parking structure. It was not the kind of room that prepared you for what walked into it. Corinna arrived with 2 of Meridian's senior people and a portfolio of facility reports she did not need. She wore the grey suit she wore when she needed a room to understand something before she'd said a word. She sat down at the table and introduced herself to the board members who didn't know her, which was most of them. Sterling arrived 4 minutes after she did. She watched the exact moment he saw her. The small hitch in his movement, the way his face reorganized itself very quickly from surprise to controlled. He sat down. He nodded at her. She nodded back. The board chair, an older man named Warren Fitch, welcomed everyone and moved into the agenda. The COO position evaluation was 3rd on the list. When they got to it, Warren summarized the situation briefly: contract expiration, performance review, board's consideration of whether to renew, restructure, or pursue other options. He noted that Meridian, as the parent property holder, had a seat at the table for this evaluation. He turned to Corinna. "Mrs. Marsh, we appreciate Meridian's involvement. Do you have thoughts to share on the position?" Corinna looked at the portfolio in front of her. She thought about what she could say. She thought about the things that would feel satisfying to say, about performance gaps, about leadership instability, about the specific optics of a COO whose personal conduct had recently required a significant restructuring of his domestic situation. She thought about all of it. Then she closed the portfolio. "I'd like to recommend renewal," she said. "Sterling Alderton has managed this facility through a difficult transition period, and the operational metrics support continuity. What the hospital needs is stability, not another leadership change." She paused. "I do think the position should be restructured, reduced scope with a deputy brought in for operational oversight. But that's about institutional growth, not individual performance." The room was quiet. Warren nodded slowly. The other board members exchanged glances. Sterling was very still. Corinna did not look at him. She had made her decision before she walked in, and it didn't require his face for confirmation. After the meeting in the hallway, Sterling caught up with her before she reached the elevator. He stopped a few feet away, the way people do when they're not sure of their welcome. "I didn't know," he said. "I know you didn't." "How long?" "A while." He looked like a man standing at the edge of a significant realization, trying to calculate how far back it went. She watched him do it. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked. The question wasn't accusatory. It was almost genuinely curious, the way you might ask about something that's already over. Corinna thought about that. It was a real question, and it deserved a real answer. "Because in the beginning, I wanted to know if you'd love me without it," she said. "And by the time I knew you wouldn't, not the way I needed, it didn't seem like information that would help either of us." He didn't say anything. She pressed the elevator button. "You'll be all right, Sterling," she said. "Do the job well. That's the only thing that matters now." The elevator came. She stepped in. He stayed in the hallway, getting smaller as the doors slid closed until she couldn't see him anymore. People who knew her well, The handful who did sometimes asked Corinna whether she regretted it. The silence, the years of letting people in her orbit operate without the full picture. It was a reasonable question. It didn't have a clean answer. What she knew was this: she had built something real. Not the company, she'd built that too. Obviously 14 hospitals and 31 clinics and a corporate structure that her college roommate had once called aggressively tidy. But the other thing, the knowledge that who she was, the part that made coffee in the morning and chose birthday cards carefully and planted things in gardens with her hands in the dirt, that part was real and had been loved, even imperfectly, even briefly, without anyone knowing what it was worth. That wasn't nothing. The months after the divorce had their own texture, quieter than she'd expected, and stranger. She sold the house on Whitmore Street eventually, not because she had to, but because it had become a room she was moving through rather than living in. She bought a smaller place closer to the water, with a porch that faced east, and she had her coffee there in the mornings, and sometimes sat there until the light changed and the neighborhood sounds settled into the particular rhythm of an ordinary day. Meridian kept growing. There was a potential acquisition in the Carolinas, a new development partnership in Atlanta, a long conversation with a group of physicians in Birmingham who wanted to do something different with primary care and needed someone who thought in decades rather than quarters. She went to those meetings with the same portfolio and the same gray suit and the same patience she'd always had for rooms that needed time to understand what they were looking at. She hired a new chief of staff, a young woman named Petra, who'd come up through finance and had a gift for seeing problems before they became crises, which was the only skill Corinna had ever truly required of the people around her. Petra was efficient and direct and had no interest in the personal history of the woman who signed her paychecks, which made her, in Corinna's experience, nearly perfect. The Alderton family receded. She heard things, the way you hear things in a city Savannah's size, where the social layers are thin enough that information passes through them, like light through gauze. She heard that Margot had eventually put together a clearer picture of who Corinna had been, and that the understanding had not arrived pleasantly. She heard that Prescott, characteristically, had said very little about it. She heard that Sterling and Brienne had lasted about 4 months after the divorce was finalized, which was the kind of information she filed away without examining too closely. She did not hear from any of them directly. She didn't expect to. The thing about holding power quietly, the thing Corinna had learned over many years of doing it, is that people tend to assume that power announces itself. They expect it to take up space, to enter a room loudly, to require acknowledgement. And so when it doesn't, when it sits across from you at a dinner table and listens to your opinions about someone else's future and drives home alone afterward, the absence of announcement gets mistaken for the absence of power. She'd never corrected that assumption. She thought sometimes about the conversation on the back porch, Margot beside her in the dark and the cicadas somewhere nearby, talking about Sterling's future as if Corinna's role in it was peripheral, as if she were the background of someone else's story. She didn't think about it with bitterness. She thought about it more the way you think about a weather pattern that has already passed, noting what it was, understanding what it meant, moving forward into clearer air. The garden at the new house needed work. She'd been putting it off, too much happening, too many other things requiring her attention. But there was a Saturday in early October when nothing was scheduled and the morning was cool, and she went to the garden center on the edge of town and came back with her car, full of things that needed planting. And she spent the better part of the day on her knees in the dirt, with her hands doing something simple and her mind doing something quiet. By late afternoon, she had the beginnings of something that might, by spring, look like exactly what she'd intended. She washed her hands at the outdoor spigot, dried them on the back of her jeans, and stood looking at what she'd made. It was a start.